Section 42 of Library of the World's Best Literature, Ancient and Modern, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Marianne. Library of the World's Best Literature, Ancient and Modern, Volume 2, Section 42, Selected Works by Jon Arnason. Jon Arnason was born in 1819 at Hof Accadian in Iceland, where his father, Arm Illugason, was clergyman. After completing the course at the Bessastad Latin School, at that time the most famous school in Iceland, he took his first position as librarian of the so-called Stiptbókasafn Islands, since 1881 called the National Library, which office he held till 1887, when he asked to be relieved from his official duties. During this period he had been also the first librarian of the Reykjavik branch of the Icelandic Literary Society, a teacher and the custodian of the library at the Latin School, which in the meantime had been moved from Bessastad to Reykjavik, secretary of the bishop, Helgi Thordarson, and custodian of the growing collection of Icelandic antiques which has formed the nucleus of a national museum. He had found time, besides, during these years, for considerable literary work, and apart from several valuable bibliographies had, alone and in collaboration, made important contributions to his native literature. He died at Reykjavik in 1888. His principal literary work, and that by which alone he is known outside of Iceland, is the collection of folk tales that appeared in Iceland in 1862-64 in 2 volumes, with the title Íslenskar Þjóðsögur og Ævintýri, Icelandic Popular Legends and Tales. A small preliminary collection called Íslensk Ævintýri, Icelandic Tales, made in collaboration with Magnus Grimsson, had been published in 1852. Subsequently Jon Arnason went to work single-handed to make an exhaustive collection of the folk tales of the country, which by travelling and correspondence he drew from every nook and corner of Iceland. No effort was spared to make the collection complete, and many years were spent in this undertaking. The results were in every way valuable. No more important collection of folk tales exists in the literature of any nation, and the work has become both a classic at home and a most suggestive link in the comparative study of folk-lore elsewhere. Arnason thus performed for his native land what the Grimms did for Germany, and what Asbjörnsen and Moe did for Norway. He has frequently been called the Grimm of Iceland. The stories of the collection have since found their way all over the world, many of them having been translated into English, German, French, and Danish. In his transcription of the tales, Arnason has followed, even more conscientiously, the plan of the Grimms in adhering to the local or individual form in which the story had come to him in writing or by oral transmission. We get in this way a perfect picture of the national spirit, and a better knowledge of life and environment in Iceland than from any other source. In these stories there is much to say of elves and trolls, of ghosts and fetches, of outlaws and the devil. Magic plays an important part, and there is the usual lore of beasts and plants. Many of them are but variants of folk tales that belong to the race. Others, however, are as plainly local evolutions, which in their whole conception are as weird and mysterious as the environment that has produced them. All the stories are from Icelandic Legends, translation of Powell and Magnusson. The Merman. Long ago a farmer lived at Vogar, who was a mighty fisherman, and of all the farms about, not one was so situated with regard to the fisheries as his. One day, according to custom, he had gone out fishing, and having cast down his line from the boat and waited a while, found it very hard to pull up again, as if there were something very heavy at the end of it. Imagine his astonishment when he found that what he had caught was a great fish, with a man's head and body. When he saw this creature was alive, he addressed it and said, "Who and whence are you?" "A merman from the bottom of the sea," was the reply. The farmer then asked him what he had been doing when the hook caught his flesh. The other replied, "I was turning the cowl of my mother's chimney pot to suit it to the wind. So let me go again, will you?" "Not for the present," said the fisherman. "You shall serve me a while first." So without more words he dragged him into the boat and rowed to shore with him. When they got to the boathouse, the fisherman's dog came to him and greeted him joyfully, barking and fawning upon him and wagging his tail. But his master's temper being none the best, he struck the poor animal, whereupon the merman laughed for the first time. Having fastened the boat, he went toward his house, dragging his prize with him over the fields, and stumbling over a hillock which lay in his way, cursed it heartily. Whereupon the merman laughed for the second time. When the fisherman arrived at the farm, his wife came out to receive him, and embraced him affectionately, and he received her salutations with pleasure, whereupon the merman laughed for the third time. Then said the farmer to the merman, "You have laughed 3 times. I am curious to know why you have laughed. Tell me, therefore." "Never will I tell you," replied the merman, "unless you promise to take me to the same place in the sea wherefrom you caught me, and there to let me go free again." So the farmer made him the promise. "Well," said the merman, "I laughed the first time because you struck your dog, whose joy at meeting you was real and sincere. The second time because you cursed the mound over which you stumbled, which is full of golden ducats. And the third time, because you received with pleasure your wife's empty and flattering embrace, who is faithless to you and a hypocrite. And now be an honest man, and take me out to the sea whence you brought me." The farmer replied, "2 things that you have told me I have no means of proving, namely, the faithfulness of my dog and the faithlessness of my wife. But the third I will try the truth of, and if the hillock contain gold, then I will believe the rest." Accordingly he went to the hillock, and having dug it up, found therein a great treasure of gold ducats, as the merman had told him. After this the farmer took the merman down to the boat, and to that place in the sea whence he had brought him. Before he put him in, the latter said to him, "Farmer, you have been an honest man, and I will reward you for restoring me to my mother, if only you have skill enough to take possession of property that I shall throw in your way. Be happy and prosper." Then the farmer put the merman into the sea, and he sank out of sight. It happened that not long after 7 sea-grey cows were seen on the beach, close to the farmer's land. These cows appeared to be very unruly, and ran away directly the farmer approached them. So he took a stick and ran after them, possessed with the fancy that if he could burst the bladder which he saw on the nose of each of them, they would belong to him. He contrived to hit the bladder on the nose of one cow, which then became so tame that he could easily catch it, while the others leaped into the sea and disappeared. The farmer was convinced that this was a gift of the merman, and a very useful gift it was, for a better cow was never seen nor milked in all the land, and she was the mother of the race of grey cows so much esteemed now. And the farmer prospered exceedingly, but never caught any more mermen. As for his wife, nothing further is told about her, so we can repeat nothing. The Fishermen of Gorethe. It is told that long ago a peasant living at Goethe in Myrdalur went out fishing round the island of Dirholar. In returning from the sea he had to cross a morass. It happened once that on his way home after nightfall he came to a place where a man had lost his horse in the bog and was unable to recover it without help. The fisherman, to whom this man was a stranger, aided him in freeing his horse from the peat. When the animal stood again safe and sound upon the dry earth, the stranger said to the fisherman, "I am your neighbour, for I live in Hemskill, and am returning from the sea, like you. But I am so poor that I cannot pay you for this service as you ought to be paid. But I will promise you, however, this much, that you shall never go to sea without catching fish, nor ever, if you take my advice, return with empty hands. But you must never put to sea without having first seen me pass your house, as if going toward the shore. Obey me in this matter, and I promise you that you shall never launch your boat in vain." The fisherman thanked him for this advice, and sure enough it was that for 3 years after, never putting to sea till he had first seen his neighbour pass his door, he always launched his boat safely, and always came home full-handed. But at the end of the 3 years it fell out that one day in the early morning the fisherman, looking out from his house, saw the wind and weather favourable, and all other fishers hurrying down to the sea to make the best of so good a time. But though he waited hour after hour in the hope of seeing his neighbor pass, the man of Hamskill never came. At last, losing his patience, he started out without having seen him go by. When he came down to the shore, he found that all the boats were launched and far away. Before night the wind rose and became a storm, and every boat that had that day put to sea was wrecked, and every fisher drowned. The peasant of Goethe alone escaping, for he had been unable to go fishing. The next night he had a strange dream, in which his neighbor from Hamskill came to him and said, "Although you did not yesterday follow my advice, I yet so far felt kindly toward you that I hindered you from going out to sea, and saved you thus from drowning. But look no more forth to see me pass, for we have met for the last time." And never again did the peasant see his neighbor pass his door. The Magic Scythe. A certain day laborer once started from his home in the south to earn wages for hay cutting in the north country. In the mountains he was suddenly overtaken by a thick mist and sleet storm, and lost his way. Fearing to go on further, he pitched his tent in a convenient spot, and taking out his provisions, began to eat. While he was engaged upon his meal, a brown dog came into the tent, so ill-favored, dirty, wet, and fierce-eyed, that the poor man felt quite afraid of it, and gave it as much bread and meat as it could devour. This dog swallowed greedily, and ran off again into the mist. At first the man wondered much to see a dog in such a wild place, where he never expected to meet with a living creature, but after a while he thought no more about the matter, and having finished his supper, fell asleep, with his saddle for a pillow. At midnight he dreamed that he saw a tall and aged woman enter his tent, who spoke thus to him: "I am beholden to you, good man, for your kindness to my daughter, but I am unable to reward you as you deserve. Here is a scythe, which I place beneath your pillow. It is the only gift I can make you, but despise it not. It will surely prove useful to you, as it can cut down all that lies before it. Only beware of putting it into the fire to temper it. Sharpen it, however, as you will, but in that way never." So saying, she was seen no more. When the man awoke and looked forth, he found the mist all gone, and the sun high in heaven. So getting all his things together and striking his tent, he laid them upon the pack-horse, saddling last of all his own horse. But on lifting his saddle from the ground, he found beneath it a small scythe blade, which seemed well worn and was rusty. On seeing this, he at once recalled to mind his dream, and taking the scythe with him, he set out once more on his way. He soon found again the road which he had lost, and made all speed to reach the well-peopled district to which he was bound. When he arrived at the north country, he went from house to house, but did not find any employment, for every farmer had laborers enough, and 1 week of hay harvest was already past. He heard it said, however, that one old woman in the district, generally thought by her neighbors to be skilled in magic and very rich, always began her hay-cutting a week later than anybody else, and though she seldom employed a laborer, always contrived to finish it by the end of the season. When by any chance, and it was a rare one, she did engage a workman, she was never known to pay him for his work. Now the peasant from the south was advised to ask the old woman for employment, having been warned of her strange habits. He accordingly went to her house and offered himself to her as a day laborer. She accepted his offer, and told him that he might, if he chose, work a week for her, but must expect no payment. "Except," she said, "you can cut more grass in the whole week than I can rake on the last day of it." To these terms he gladly agreed, and began mowing. And a very good scythe he found that to be which the woman had given him in his dream, for it cut well and never wanted sharpening, though he worked with it for 5 days unceasingly. He was well content, too, with his place, for the old woman was kind enough to him. One day, entering the forge next to her house, he saw a vast number of scythe handles, rakes, and a big heap of blades, and wondered beyond measure what the old lady could want with all these. It was the 5th day, the Friday, when he was asleep that night. The same elf woman whom he had seen upon the mountains came again to him and said, "Large as are the meadows you have mown, Your employer will easily be able to rake in all that hay tomorrow, and if she does so, will, as you know, drive you away without paying you. When therefore you see yourself worsted, go into the forge, take as many scythe handles as you think proper, fit their blades to them, and carry them out into the part of the land where the hay is yet uncut. There you must lay them on the ground, and you shall see how things go." This said, she disappeared, and in the morning the labourer, getting up, set to work as usual at his mowing. At 6 o'clock the old witch came out, bringing 5 rakes with her, and said to the man, "A goodly piece of ground you have mowed, indeed." And so saying, she spread the rakes upon the hay. Then the man saw, to his astonishment, that though the one she held in her hand raked in great quantities of hay, the other 4 raked in no less each, all of their own accord, and with no hand to wield them. At noon, seeing that the old woman would soon get the best of him, he went into the forge and took out several scythe handles, to which he fixed their blades, and bringing them out into the field, laid them down upon the grass which was yet standing. Then all the scythes set to work of their own accord, and cut down the grass so quickly that the rakes could not keep pace with them. And so they went on all the rest of the day, and the old woman was unable to rake in all the hay which lay in the fields. After dark, she told him to gather up his scythes, and to take them into the house again, while she collected her rakes, saying to him, "You are wiser than I took you to be, and you know more than myself. So much the better for you may stay with me as long as you like." He spent the whole summer in her employment, and they agreed very well together, mowing with mighty little trouble the vast amount of hay. In the autumn she sent him away, well laden with money, to his own home in the south. The next summer, and more than one summer following, he spent in her employ, always being paid as his heart could desire at the end of the season. After some years he took a farm of his own in the south country, and was always looked upon by all his neighbours as an honest man, a good fisherman, and an able workman in whatever he might put his hand to. He always cut his own hay, never using any scythe but that which the elf woman had given him upon the mountains, nor did any of his neighbours ever finish their mowing before him. One summer it chanced that while he was fishing, one of his neighbours came to his house and asked his wife to lend him her husband's scythe, as he had lost his own. The farmer's wife looked for one, but could only find the one upon which her husband set such store. This, however, a little loth, she lent to the man, begging him at the same time never to temper it in the fire, for that, she said, her good man never did. So the neighbour promised, and taking it with him, bound it to a handle and began to work with it. But, sweep as he would, and strain as he would, and sweep and strain he did right lustily, not a single blade of grass fell. Wroth at this, the man tried to sharpen it, but with no avail. Then he took it into his forge, intending to temper it, for, thought he, what harm could that possibly do? But as soon as the flames touched it, the steel melted like wax, and nothing was left but a little heap of ashes. Seeing this, the man went in haste to the farmer's house, where he had borrowed it, and told the woman what had happened. She was at her wits' end with fright and shame when she heard of it, for she knew well enough how her husband set store by this scythe, and how angry he would be at its loss. And angry indeed he was, when he came home, and he beat his wife well for her folly in lending what was not hers to lend. But his wrath was soon over, and he never again, as he never had before, laid the stick about his wife's shoulders. The Manservant and the Water Elves. In a large house, where all the chief rooms were panelled, there lived once upon a time a farmer, whose ill fate it was that every servant of his that was left alone to guard the house on Christmas Eve, while the rest of the family went to church, was found dead when the family returned home. As soon as the report of this was spread abroad, the farmer had the greatest difficulty in procuring servants who would consent to watch alone in the house on that night, until at last, one day a man, a strong fellow, offered him his services to sit up alone and guard the house. The farmer told him what fate awaited him for his rashness, but the man despised such a fear, and persisted in his determination. On Christmas Eve, when the farmer and all his family, except for the new manservant, were preparing for church, The farmer said to him, "Come with us to church. I cannot leave you here to die." But the other replied, "I intend to stay here, for it would be unwise in you to leave your house unprotected, and besides, the cattle and sheep must have their food at the proper time." "Never mind the beasts," answered the farmer. "Do not be so rash as to remain in the house this night, for whenever we have returned from church on this night, we have always found every living thing in the house dead, with all its bones broken." But the man was not to be persuaded, as he considered all these fears beneath his notice. So the farmer and the rest of the servants went away and left him behind, alone in the house. As soon as he was by himself he began to consider how to guard against anything that might occur, for a dread had stolen over him, in spite of his courage, that something strange was about to take place. At last he thought that the best thing to do was, first of all, light up the family room, and then to find some place in which to hide himself. As soon as he had lighted all the candles, he moved 2 planks out of the wainscot at the end of the room, and creeping into the space between it and the wall, restored the planks to their places, so that he could see plainly into the room, and yet avoid being himself discovered. He had scarcely finished concealing himself when 2 fierce and strange-looking men entered the room and began looking about. One of them said, "I smell a human being." "No," replied the other, "there is no human being here." Then they took a candle and continued their search, until they found the man's dog asleep under one of the beds. They took it up, and having dashed it on the ground till every bone in its body was broken, hurled it from them. When the manservant saw this, he congratulated himself on not having fallen into their hands. Suddenly the room was filled with people, who were laden with tables and all kinds of table furniture, silver, claws and all, which they spread out, and having done so, sat down to a rich supper, which they had also brought with them. They feasted noisily, and spent the remainder of the night in drinking and dancing. 2 of them were appointed to keep guard, in order to give the company due warning of the approach either of anybody or of the day. 3 times they went out, always returning with the news that they neither saw the approach of any human being, nor yet the break of day. But when the manservant suspected the night to be pretty far spent, he jumped from his place of concealment into the room, and clashing the 2 planks together with as much noise as he could make, shouted like a madman, "The day! The day! The day!" On these words the whole company rose scared from their seats and rushed headlong out, leaving behind them not only their tables and all the silver dishes, but even the very clothes they had taken off for ease in dancing. In the hurry of flight many of them were wounded and trodden under foot, while the rest ran into the darkness, the manservant after them, clapping the planks together and shrieking, "The day! The day! The day!" until they came to a large lake, into which the whole party plunged headlong and disappeared. From this the man knew them to be water elves. Then he returned home, gathered the corpses of the elves who had been killed in the flight, killed the wounded ones, and, making a great heap of them all, burned them. When he had finished this task, he cleaned up the house and took possession of all the treasures the elves had left behind them. On the farmer's return, the servant told him all that had occurred, and showed him the spoils. The farmer praised him for a brave fellow, and congratulated him on having escaped with his life. The man gave him half the treasures of the elves, and ever afterward prospered exceedingly. This was the last visit the water elves ever paid to that house. The Crossways. It is supposed that among the hills there are certain crossroads, from the centre of which you can see 4 churches, one at the end of each road. If you sit at the crossing of these roads on Christmas Eve, or as others say on New Year's Eve, elves come from every direction and cluster round you, and ask you, with all sorts of banishments and fair promises, to go with them. But you must continue silent. Then they bring to you the rarities and delicacies of every description, gold, silver, and precious stones, meat and wines, of which they beg you to accept. But you must neither move a limb nor accept a single thing they offer you. If you get so far as this without speaking, elf women come to you in the likeness of your mother, your sister, or any other relation, and beg you to come with them, using every art and entreaty. But beware you neither move nor speak. And if you can continue to keep silent and motionless all the night, until you see the first streak of dawn, then start up and cry aloud, Praise be to God, his daylight filleth the heavens! As soon as you have said this, the elves will leave you, and with you all the wealth they have used to entice you, which will now be yours. But should you either answer or accept of their offers, you will from that moment become mad. On the night of one Christmas Eve, a man named Fusi was out on the crossroads, and managed to resist all the entreaties and proffers of the elves, until one of them offered him a large lump of mutton suet, and begged him to take a bite of it. Fusi, who had up till this time gallantly resisted all such offers as gold and silver and diamonds and such filthy lucre, could hold out no longer, and crying, Seldom have I refused a bite of mutton suet, he went mad. Section 42.